Welcome back to everybody to another video. Today we're talking about Dark Souls 3. Y'all thought I was done talking about Dark Souls, but I'm never done talking about Dark Souls. That's just how it is. I love this shit. So, Dark Souls 3 is the game we're talking about today. We're gonna kind of be talking. We're talking about like the solo experience or progressing through the story, more or less. The previous video was exclusively talking about the PvP, so we're not really going to touch on PvP here all too much, if at all, because I've got a whole video talking about that already. So you guys can just reference back to that if you're interested in the PvP aspects of the game. Here, we're going to be talking about primarily just what goes on in the main story of the game. We're going to be talking a little bit about the storyline. We might talk a little bit about co-op, because that's not directly related to PvP per se, but yeah, should be a good time. This is a game that, like the Dark Souls remaster, I'm very passionate about it. I very much enjoy Dark Souls quite a lot. Dark Souls 3 is, I think it's a phenomenal game. So, like, I think it goes without saying that I pretty much recommend it. We're gonna come out early with the store page information here, so that we can get that out of the way and get completely immersed in everything else. So the standard price for the game is still full price on Steam, still $60. Still worth it in my opinion. You could also get the deluxe edition. It comes with all the DLC. That is the Ashes of Ariandel and the Ring City DLCs. That's it's $85. I know it's a steep price tag, but considering the game itself is $60 and each individual DLC is $15, I would say that that's definitely not a bad deal. Definitely not a bad deal. The game is very positive on Steam, 92% positive overall, and for good reason. It's a really good game. It's the final Dark Souls game, unless Miyazaki changes his mind later. But as it stands right now, it is the most positive, or the final Dark Souls game that we'll be seeing, and they knocked it out of the park with this one. So this is a follow-up to Dark Souls 2, which was obviously a follow-up to Dark Souls 1. So let's get a little bit of backstory going on here. And see if we can figure out some of the decisions that went into the creation of this game. So Dark Souls 1, the first Dark Souls, was a colossal hit. It was huge. People loved it. It was the perfect follow-up to Demon's Souls. And since it wasn't a PlayStation 3 exclusive, that gave a lot of people the opportunity to experience it. People who wouldn't have normally had that opportunity. People who didn't have a PlayStation. People with computers or Xboxes. Granted, it didn't come out onto the computer until the Prepare to Die edition, which was bundled with the DLC, ported terribly. Well, not terribly. The port itself is fine. It's the button mapping that's terrible. But yeah. And then after that, a while back, Dark Souls 2 came out. Now, I believe that Dark Souls 2 did not have Miyazaki's hands on it, per se. He left his team to do it on their own, without him. Let somebody else be at the helm. And overall, it was a good game. It was definitely a good game. There's a lot to talk about. We're going to do a video on it eventually, so we'll get into all that shit when the time comes. Don't think I'm going to leave any of the Dark Souls games alone. The only thing I'm going to say here that will be touched on in a future video about that game is that it has its strengths and it has its weaknesses, and it was ultimately met with very mixed opinions within the community. So Dark Souls 3 was more of a return to form, so to speak, in that it holds a lot more in common with Dark Souls 1 than it does with Dark Souls 2. It's also kind of like a love letter to the Dark Souls community, in the sense that there's a lot of references and a lot of items from the previous games, including stuff from Demon's Souls, like the Morion Blade from Demon's Souls, as an example. And of course stuff like the Chaos Blade that's been around for the whole series. So this game is kind of like the, I guess you could say the quote-unquote ultimate experience is kind of what it's billed as. And really, honestly, it is. Movement and controls are the smoothest they've ever been. They don't get any smoother in the Dark Souls franchise. Dark Souls 2 feels feels a little bit tighter in a sense, but it also feels too stiff in a sense. You know, it doesn't feel smooth and fluid. It's very tight, but it's not smooth. So, and then the first Dark Souls is kind of clunky in a sense, actually. It could have definitely used a little bit of smoothing out. I'm glad they didn't smooth it out in the remaster because it keeps it alive. Keeps alive the very raw, just visceral controls and feeling of the game. But I wouldn't have been mad if they did smooth it out. So, controls-wise though, we're at the best Dark Souls has ever been here with Dark Souls 3. And of course, this control scheme has been even further smoothed out due to, well, for one, they got it this smooth because they also had experience with Bloodborne at this point. And for two, they then continued to smooth it out even further because Sekiro uses more or less the same kind of controls. And that game runs beautifully. So, what are we doing? What is the purpose of our journey here? Because if you recall, the first Dark Souls, our journey is to go and link the first flame. So what's our journey here? Well, it's the same thing. We're going to link the first flame, but instead of gathering Lord Souls so that we ourselves become powerful, we are gathering the ashes of the Lords of Cinder to bolster the flame with us. And I think that's very interesting, but very familiar at the same time, you know? It's a good excuse to give you a gauntlet of bosses to go through. Very good bosses, mind you. And it's also very distinctly Dark Souls. So, let's talk a little bit about the bosses, since we're, you know, on that. The bosses, as with the whole Dark Souls franchise, are primarily quite strong, pretty heavily a selling point for the game. I mean, even the tutorial boss, Iodex Gundyr, is a tough customer compared to other tutorial bosses that I fought. If you recall from the Dark Souls 1 footage for that video, that stray demon just had no chance. I just completely decimated him. Mostly because I rolled a Pyromancer, and that was easy. But, yeah. Iodex Gundyr is weak against fire here, in this game too. But, you can't roll a Pyromancer out the gate like that. And Pyromancy functions differently. We'll get into that in a bit. But what you can do is you can get them black fire bombs, some sweet, sweet black fire bombs as a gift at the character creation screen. And the strategy is to get Iodex Gundyr into phase 2 and start tossing them. Make sure you don't miss. There's also some regular fire bombs around in the area that you'll see me gather. Those are nice to have as a just in case. Also, if you're curious why my character isn't wearing any clothes, it's because I ran the depraved route. So I don't exactly have the ideal weapon to be going toe-to-toe with anything, really. I mean, the glove's not bad, it's just not good. Also, at no point in this video do I actually find pants, so the things that happen, I guess. I'll find the pants eventually on this character. We won't have to be cold forever. We're also not going to touch too much on the DLC. But anyway, back to the topic at hand, bosses. So I think that out of all the tutorial bosses I've ever fought, not just with Dark Souls, with just games in general, games that actually give you a boss fight as part of the tutorial to kind of introduce you to the general scheme of how boss fights are going to work, I think that Iodex Gundyr is one of the best. Because he's not too difficult, but he's absolutely going to kick your ass if you aren't careful. And I like that. I like that he's a fair challenge for a newcomer, you know? So that I thought was a good move. He was definitely considerably harder than the Stray Demon. The Stray Demon, not only do you get to be a Pyromancer if you so choose, you could also get that plunge attack on him early on. The first time you make your way over here to Iodex Gundyr, when you pull out the coiled sword, and he's waking up, you have a moment to beat on him. And even though the health bar is not down at the bottom, that damage is registering, and you are fully capable of getting yourself a pretty decent head start there. So, but other bosses in the game that are quite notable are bosses like the Nameless King. And, like, come on, the Nameless King, bro? You ever heard of him? He's fucking great. He's considered to be one of the hardest bosses in Dark Souls history. Plus, there's also less interesting bosses, like before the Nameless King, that dragon. I mean, it's an interesting boss, but he's not a hard boss. You just run through the level, and then you plunge attack him, and he dies instantly. Like, that's not even a secret. That's literally the whole thing you have to do. I mean, you could fight him straight up, and if you do, he's super difficult. But why would you do that when you could literally just run a circle around him, up a tower, fight a couple of dudes, and then plunge attack him for instant kill? The Lords of Cinder also make for pretty memorable boss fights. All of them do. I think if you're following along with the NPC storylines, the right ones, because you can't do all the NPC storylines in one new game cycle, but if you're following the right ones, once you get to certain points, these boss fights are considerably improved. I'm looking at you, Yorm. But yeah, so we're gonna move on from the bosses here. There's overall though they are great. We're also gonna not talk about the DLC. Well, I'll do the DLC in a whole video to itself. There's a lot of shit to talk about with Arendelle and the Ring City. There's a lot of shit going on in each of those DLCs. They might even each get their own video. I don't know. We'll see what happens when I go to make them. But combat itself is as fluid as it's ever been. The 4-way directional rolling is now 8-way directional rolling, considerably opening things up. Level design is as good as it's ever been. It's not quite as good as it was in the first Dark Souls, and I think that there's too many bonfires, honestly. But because after you beat Dragon Slayer armor and then make your way to the Duke's Archives, or whatever it's called, if you go back to the Dragon Slayer bonfire, you can literally see that first Duke's Archives bonfire from that bonfire. Like, come on. Is that really necessary? Make me earn the next one a little bit. I mean, come on now, man. I didn't even have to take that second bonfire out to dinner. Like, what the hell? It was just there, waiting for me. Too easy. As far as everything else is concerned, though, as far as the storytelling is very much on par with the first Dark Souls. You're not getting a huge amount of storyline fed to you. As I briefly mentioned, all the NPCs that you meet, for the most part, have their own personal stories that you can participate in and follow. A lot of them are kind of difficult to follow, honestly. And like I already said, you can't actually follow all of them in the same new game cycle. You'll have to pick and choose who do you like. Who do you like? In order to see all of their stories and get all of the rewards. All of their storylines tending to have certain item rewards. Plus, there's Covenants again. There's been Covenants in literally every Dark Souls game ever. So, Warriors of Sunlight have returned, as have the Blades of the Dark Moon. There's also the Blue Sentinels, who function exactly the same as the Blades of the Dark Moon. And those are to protect the... I forget what the Covenant is called offhand, but it's basically the Way of the White, again. And you have the Warriors of Sunlight just are co-op guys. There's also the Rosaria's Fingers Covenant. That's your Dark Wraith Covenant, just focused on invasions, straight up. You have two Covenants, the Watchdogs of Farron, and I forget what the other one's called, but offhand, but it's over in the Boreal Valley, and those are both PvP covenants and function a lot like the Forest Hunters do, in the sense that they auto-summon you into people's worlds to kill them when they're in their respective areas. You are protecting your turf. Now, there's a lot more to talk about than I thought here. We're running a little bit long here, so I'm going to do a follow-up video at some point and we'll continue this discussion about Dark Souls, because the video is getting to the point where it's just getting a little bit long. We're a little bit longer than the previous Dark Souls video, or any other video I've done for that matter. So I think we'll go ahead and cut it here. I don't know. Maybe it's more beneficial to just do long form videos, say everything that needs to be said about a game all at once. That's up to all of you as well as me. I'm not powerful enough to make this decision on my own. I need the support of people, the people who would ideally be watching. But anyway, until next time, like, comment, subscribe. Go ahead and grease that bell button a little bit if you'd like to. Feel free to dislike. And as with every video, I will fucking see you later.